Hello and welcome to the fifth webinar in the series this week. So this is Essential Sociology, getting ready for Paper 2, Beliefs in Society. Now in today's webinar, what we're trying to do here is deal with some of the trickier topics, such as typologies, can science be a belief system, and with that we're going to be looking at ideology. As well as this, we're going to practice ways of applying contemporary events to your answers. So we're going to look at some contemporary examples, and I'm going to show you a paragraph by which you could use as well. And then we're going to consider some of the really useful tips for fantastic essay writing. Now within beliefs in society, generally there are quite a few tricky topics that emerge, and the reason why they become tricky topics is because we often overcomplicate them and make them a little bit harder than they need to be. Now the reason why most of us get a bit overwhelmed with it is because there are so many key terms within this unit, and it's all about just knowing the ones that are essential over the ones that are desirable, and make sure that they are the ones that are present within our terminologies. Now, before we can get into science as a belief system, we're going to look at ideology. Now, ideology is a belief system that supports the interests of a particular group. Now, ideologies inform political, religious and scientific belief systems and are used to keep those in power powerful. Now, Marxism and ideology here really starts to talk about how Marxists believe that ruling class ideology is used to help create an informed belief system. Now, this will support the economic base and superstructure. Now, Marxists argue that the use of ideology is controlled by the bourgeoisie or ruling class, as they own the means of production, capital, machinery and labour power, whilst the proletariat is unable to take back control due to them not owning the means of production, which means it's harder for them to survive if they do not rely on the ruling class or bourgeoisie. As a result, the ruling class ideology will ensure that economic base is controlled by the working class and that all parts of the superstructure are promoting the ruling class ideology through the mass media, education and religion. The way in which the ruling class controls the working class is by controlling the ideas, beliefs and values in society. The mass media, as an example, encourages capitalistic ideas through a consumeristic culture, creating therefore a passive workforce that will become accepting of the state's power and also that they are powerless. Now, this led to Marx and Engels to argue that the ideas of the ruling class are in every age the ruling ideas overall. Now, the next area we're looking at is feminism and ideology. So, feminists argue that patriarchal ideology is used to legitimate and maintain male social dominance. Now, feminists argue that the patriarchal ideology involves promoting the following beliefs. So, men are superior to women, men are more logical than women are too emotional and should not hold positions of responsibility, and it's natural for women to take the main role with childcare. By holding these views within society, this allows for patriarchal ideology to flourish and oppress women further. Now, radical feminists like Millett argues that women are socialized into having a dominant temperament by society's culture, meaning they are encouraged to take control, whilst non-ideological factors such as violence are used to ensure women are oppressed further. Therefore, the patriarchal ideology is entrenched. An example of this can be seen with women bettering their physical appearance to attract men. Meanwhile, postmodernism and ideology, they believe that scientific thought and rationale has become the dominant belief system in contemporary society. Although this ideology provides meaning about the world, it's just one of a number of alternative meta-narratives. So postmodernists like Lyotard argues that concepts about meta-narratives in modernity largely ended in disaster. So, for example, the meta-narratives about fascism, communism, or scientific rationalism all ended in negative side effects in the world. If we take the example of scientific rationalism, this created a multitude of issues for our planet, such as global warming, issues with environment, etc. Now, he contended that in a postmodern society, people no longer believe in meta-narratives and ideology is declining as a result of this. Now that we've spoken about ideology, that was absolutely essential before we can really get into science as a belief system. Because what we need to recognise is science will contain and hold its own version of ideologies. Now, science aspires to be an open belief system, seeing itself to be open to scrutiny, questioning and criticism. But really, we've got to question if this is really the case. Religion and ideological belief systems tend to be closed since they are not open to scrutiny and believe that what they are arguing is the one and only truth. Now, Comte, a functionalist and positivist, describes the three stages that society has passed through to develop scientific thought and knowledge. Now, these are known as the theological, metaphysical, and positive stages. Now, a quick description of each one of these stages is as follows. So, the theological stage, a religion and superstitious beliefs are dominant, people will follow sacred texts, and beliefs are not open to debate. Whilst in the metaphysical stage, we start to see philosophy coming into fruition, and this starts to dominate and create rational thought, and this is being used to explain why and how people behave. Now, an example of this is the fact that democracy overthrew the place of kings and queens, because we no longer took it as God-given positions, but ones that had to be earned. Whilst the positive stage uses objective knowledge beliefs that are no longer based on opinion. Now, Comte says the positive stage sees individuals turning towards science and rational thought rather than supernatural explanations to explain phenomena. Now, Comte would view this as the main feature of positivism. Now, the benefit of taking a scientific stance is that these beliefs can be tested and false beliefs can be rejected. This means that with us taking on science's belief system, we will mean and have a move forward towards a more progressive belief system. Now, Popper agreed with Comte and that social science, unlike religion, can be objective, but he argued that we are unable to create laws that will be universally true. He introduced the idea of falsifiability, which means we have to make precise predictions which can be tested and seen if they are true or have the ability to be proven incorrect. Now, Popper and Comte see science as a belief system as superior to all other belief systems, as science is getting close as possible to the truth until it can be falsified. Now, the acceptance of science as a belief system would be restricted by the paradigm that is dominant at that moment of time. So, e.g., a non-scientific paradigm would not allow for scientific thought to be accepted as a dominant ideology. Now, Latoyard here believes that science has begun to replace more traditional meta-narratives, since it has become a meta-narrative of progress, which is not the case for religion. Now, science within the postmodern world is seen as one of the many possible truths. This means people are happy to explore and trial new therapies, which will enable them to uncover what they prefer to use, whilst religious beliefs in postmodern world are no longer followed, since religion is part of this pick-and-mix culture due to the rise of various religious movements. Now, what we're moving on to next is the idea of typologies. Now, typologies enable us to break down the different religious organisations that exist and explain them in a greater depth of detail. So we can see from this table, we've got the sociologists that created definitions with the respective typology and some of their attitudes towards society. Now, if we break this down, so looking at the church, now the person that came up with the definition for the church typology was Trotsky in 1931. Now, an example of a church would be the Roman Catholic Church. Now, what we've got in terms of member backgrounds, it draws in all members from all different classes, but particularly the upper classes are most likely to join because the hierarchy within the church benefits them the most. Now, the relationship to the state is sometimes it is close to the state. It depends on whether the state is secular or not. Tolerance, it guards the monopoly of religious truth viciously. It believes that it is the only one that is holding religious truth. Whilst denominations were, the sociologists that created this typology were Napier in 1929. An example of this type of church is Methodism, which is a denomination, obviously a subsect of Christianity, as it were, which has got a different stance in terms of how the Bible should be read and belief systems should be implemented. Now, member backgrounds tend to be universal in nature, drawing in people from all of the different ranges. Now, by this comment, we mean that there isn't one single class that is brought into obviously these denominations, but generally what we do not see is the ruling class or upper classes going for this. Now, the relationship with the state, it doesn't identify with the state because it believes that we should have secular ideas within our society. Now, tolerance, it tolerates other religions, but it recognises that it may have the monopoly of truth. Now, the sect Trotsky in 1931 created this definition. An example of a sect would be a Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, the member background, it's mainly lower classes that are joined in. Remember, the people that join sects generally are the people that are disaffected with the society by which they exist in. So obviously this informs their relationship with the state and tolerance, because what we can see with most sects is it's in direct opposition to the state, because the ideology that it's preaching to its members are vastly different to that of the state's ideology. Alongside this, it believes that they possess the one and only true monopoly of religious truth. So therefore, anything else that is being preached or taught is incorrect and needs to be acknowledged as such. Now, those are the typologies just broken down nice and simply for you in order for you to understand what these definitions are all about. Now, within the beliefs and in society unit, it's absolutely essential that we start to use modern examples. Now, these modern examples allow for us to show off our sociological imagination, show that we can go beyond the specification, that we have got wider knowledge and wider understanding of what's going in the world. So by doing so, you are just allowing for a higher level application in terms of your knowledge. Now, obviously the thing that really is the clinching point of this is make sure that the application is relevant to the question. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through some examples of recent events and how you could use them. Of reform through sermons. Now, in some countries, this resulted in civil war starting, other countries, military coups, or replacing a dictatorship with a democratic leader. Now, the next event that we're going to be looking at are the attacks in Mosul, so the ISIS attacks. Now, even though the attacks in Mosul are extensive and the damage to the communities and societies go beyond religious damage, it's essential for us to acknowledge what happened within this area. Now, ISIS as a fundamentalist group attacked Mosul with the sole purpose of replacing dominant ideology with one that they believe the Quran to be teaching. Now, this saw that any monotheistic religious site that depicted God was destroyed. Now, within Mosul itself, it would be difficult to see any Christian sites still to be present, as it is in direct opposition with ISIS ideology and their reading and understanding of the Quran. By attacking Mosul, ISIS are hoping to bring society back to traditional ways of Islam and the Quran, so they believe that they are a conservative force enacting change within a society that has lost its way. Now, the Fundamentalist Church of the Latter-day Saints, or FLDS, is one of the largest denominations of the Mormon Church. Now, they practice polygamy with the family, whereby men are encouraged to take as many brides as possible. Now, the leader of the church was Warren Jeffs, who believed himself to be a prophet carrying the message of God to his people. He encouraged individuals to give up their worldly desires and live within a compound, which also restricted food, clothing choices, and relationship types. Some of the behaviour he condoned was marrying young girls off to older men within this cult. In addition to this, it was speculated he was taking a radical end to the cult, with guns being stockpiled, preparing for any form of military or governmental interference. Now let's break down in terms of the perspectives. So, Marxist. So, for the Arab Spring, this is ruling class using religion to legitimate inequality. So, the fact of, even though some of the revolutions failed, it'd be like, yep, It failed because the way that we're running the country is the best way and the only way. Meanwhile, neo-Marxists will be seeing this as using religion to create social change. The ideas by which the mosques were preaching through sermons to obviously help liberate and carry the message and the reform through. This is very similar to what happened in Nicaragua with liberation theology that Otto Maduro identified. So that's a really nice link there. Now, feminism, it's the potential for overthrowing male dominance because, as we know within these countries, females are often treated as second-class citizens. So, as a result of this, more equality could happen. With the Mosul attacks of ISIS, what we're looking at from Marxist viewpoint is this is a dominant group attempting to destroy counterculture to ensure dominance of ideology. So therefore, what they're ensuring is that there isn't anyone questioning or making them sway from the path that the dominant group want them to do so. So it's ensuring that it's remaining as a conservative force. Neo-Marxism, so the working class or less dominant groups trying to create a change. So this is where we're seeing a dominant group trying to use the fundamentalist teachings of the Quran to bring society back to tradition. Now, this is where we would argue that it's acting as a conservative force because it's trying to bring a society that's modern back to tradition. Now, examples of this can be seen with Iran as well, which changed drastically, where it had a really heavy Western ideology, and then all of a sudden a revolution occurred that caused a real staunch Islamic society to emerge again. Now, within feminism, women increasingly oppressed by Islamic ideology, and they're always seen as unable to be fully participating within the Islamic faith overall. This could be due to sex and sexuality as well. Now, obviously we know here, in terms of this type of ideology, women are often the most oppressed, and Nawal al-Saadawi recognises the most within her feminist teachings. The Fundamentalist Church of the Latter-day Saints here, with Marxism, what Marxism and neo-Marx would argue is Engels suggests that the woman is seen as domestic slave, reliant on the man for support. So what we're seeing here is just upholding traditional expectations of gender roles within the family, that women are still adhering to how society generally structures relationships. So even though this is a cult in a sense, it's still representing the mainstream ideas by which the ruling class are promoting. Meanwhile, in feminism, what we're seeing here is that women are traded off as commodities, as are assets. So fathers will get their daughters married to men who are high in the cult in order to gain more status. Now, what we're seeing here is just reinforcing patriarchy. It's seen that women are forever the second-class citizens of it all. Now that we've covered some of the main viewpoints as to what's going on, what we are going to look at is we're going to look at a potential structure of a paragraph. Now, the structure of the paragraph will be about Marxism and religion's role in preventing social change. Now, what we can see with this paragraph is it starts off with Marxism argues religion is a tool of the ruling class which keeps the dominant ideology and prevents social change. For example, the ruling class would have used the Arab Spring as a way of reinforcing their ideology. The Arab Spring was a civil uprising within the Arab region which was politically motivated, but the religion played a central role in organising protests. Therefore, the working class would accept the oppression which they encounter within their daily lives if the revolution failed, as they believed that they had overthrown the oppressive government to replace with a more lenient one and tolerable state if the revolution was successful. Moreover, this demonstrates how the ruling class are using social change to ensure their ideology remains dominant and any alternative ideology is overthrown. So therefore, they're ensuring religion remains as a conservative force. However, neo-Marxists such as Otto Maduro would disagree with Marxists about religion being a conservative force. They note that radical changes that occurred in Latin American society were done through the use of liberation theology taught by the Catholic Church. As a result, this directly challenges Marxist ideas regarding religion being a conservative force. Now, within this section of the exam, you have got 4 questions by which you will be answering. So you'll have an hour on this section in total. Now you get given two 10-mark questions. One will be without an item, one will be with an item, by which we'll discuss more in a second. The other will be a 20-mark question, which is an extended essay, and that will be 30 minutes for you to use and discuss. Now this is the breakdown of the two 10-mark questions in paper 2. Now obviously a reminder, you have to allow yourself 15 minutes for each one of these questions. So the first one is outline and explain 2. Now this requires you to bring in your own knowledge to link together two themes within the question. Now half the marks for AO1, whilst the AO2 and AO3 are all present within this question as well. So we've got if the AOs have completely escaped you, AO1 is knowledge and understanding, AO2 is application, and AO3 is analysis and evaluation. Now so that means throughout all of this, you need to ensure your own knowledge is applied and bringing everything together whilst you explain and you analyse. For the next question, you're applying material from the item and analysing two perspectives. Now, this question requires you to find and select two pieces of information from the item and base your answer around them. So, for example, the AO1, AO2 and AO3 will all be present in fairly equal measures within this question itself. So you need to make sure that the item isn't neglected and is present within your answer quite heavily. Now in terms of a structure for a 10-mark question, we often get asked this question quite a lot. Now what you are expected to do is write two detailed paragraphs which link the two parts of the topic identified in the question. So this also another automatic thing by which most people ask us about is, do you need to write a conclusion? No conclusion is needed, it's not mentioned within the mark scheme. Now, if you do choose to write an introduction, it must be for the purpose of defining keywords or concepts that the question is asking you. So you're just explaining some of the basic stuff that has been identified. Now, the main caveat with this is do not spend ages writing an introduction because it might render completely pointless. Because you don't want to spend too much time writing the introduction and not have enough time to actually spend on the quality paragraphs. Now the way in which we suggest that you deal with this is through the use of the sociological sandwich paragraphs. Now what we're going to do now is look at how this can be used, so explain it through once more, and then we're going to give you an example of a sociological paragraph as well for you. Now within the sociological sandwich you can see the top layer, so the top piece of bread there, is going to be the identify. So you're going to state the advantage or disadvantage or one of the beliefs or arguments. Then you do the describe. Now this is where you use an example to elaborate on your initial point. Now this is where you start to get into the garnish of it all. Then you get into the explain. So this is the meaty section, as it were. This is where you link back to the question here and you make sure you clearly explain how this is an advantage or why this explanation even matters. And then you get to the bottom bread piece, which is the analyse and evaluate. And this part is often the most magical part. Now, because this is where you analyse the extent to which what you've been arguing is an advantage, or if it is even beneficial, credible. Is there maybe supportive evidence that you can use to bring this to life? Or is there contradictory evidence by which you could use? What insight might we gain from other methods or perspectives being used within our answer? And how accurate is our evidence? Now here's a brief example of what we can do for this ideology question. So the identify, so this is me identifying my first point. So ideology can be seen as a belief system that supports the interests of particular group systems. This is our describe. So ideologies are used to maintain the power of those in the dominant group. Ideology can be seen as informing political, religious and scientific belief. Then we've got our explain, so we're linking it back to the question here. So Marxists argue that the ruling class ideology is used to help create an informed belief system. This will support the economic base and superstructure. Therefore, it can be argued that ideology is used as a method of creating a shared belief system that supports the dominant group in charge. And then we get to that wonderful part, which is the analysis and evaluation. Now, this is where we say, however, functionists would argue that religion ensures a shared ideology is present to reinforce value consensus. Therefore, by having a shared ideology within society, enables society to function well, with norms and values being socialised into future generations. In addition to this, culture, history and language being passed on will ensure society survive and preventing anomie from occurring. Now that's just a quick brief introduction as to what a sociological sandwich can look like for a 10-mark question. Now that we've covered the 10 mark question, let's look at a 20 marker. Now this is an example of a 20 mark question that has got the potential of coming up. So what you can see at the top there, you get given a nice little item by which you are expected to use. Remember, this is a gift from the examiner, so don't ignore it. Now the question itself, you have to obviously read very carefully. It's saying material from the item and your own knowledge, and you need to evaluate that science has the greatest influence on individuals' beliefs. So you need to make sure throughout the whole of your question that is central to what you are addressing. Now within this question itself, what we've given as a basic structure is have a discussion on science's belief system and what this means. So what we're saying is it's discarding traditional meta-narratives and it's providing a new one for our society. Now what I would say here is talk through Compton what he views science as a belief system, whether it is a viable belief system, and talk about the changes that have happened in society to enable science to become dominant. Then we talk about Latoyard, so science replacing traditional meta-narratives, but is it providing a adequate enough traditional meta-narrative? Bring in Kuhn here about the idea that science has replaced a non-scientific paradigm, and that's why it's become the most dominant type of paradigm that is used to make our understanding of the world better. Then we bring in Bruce about secularization, so about how society and the state, so religion and the state have separated from one another, which means that actually what we're seeing is science is just replacing the function by which religion used to have. Reference the ideas by Weber and Berger about the idea that religion has lost its enchantment within the world. This means that we've lost this sacred canopy that used to protect us from all the bad things that happen in society and used to provide us with explanations as to why these things were happening. Now we are just too very much aware of everything that's happening and have provided an explanation for it as well. Now the conclusion here is they would argue that science has started to impact individuals more than religion. So evidence for this is to whom do we turn to for an explanation of phenomena such as diseases? And that is a really good piece of evidence that you can use to bring this point to life. Now we're going to look at an example paragraph here. So the one way in which science has replaced religion is through the impact of secularization. So secularization means that religion has lost its influence in society and declined in power. So for example, the passing of legislation through Parliament is less likely to require church consultation that was the case in the past. So if we look at something like the same-sex marriage bill, this would be the case. Now Bruce supports this view by arguing that Christianity in Britain will decline to a point from which it can never recover, and that some denominations will be extinct by 2030. Now this is a direct result of religion losing some of its power and influence over individuals and states. As well as this, more and more people are turning to belief systems like science to explain society and the new phenomena we encounter. Okay, that's the end of today's webinar. Now, log on to the tutor2u.net website and have a look at the new events that are happening. We're keeping the webinars going as we're going through the exam season. Follow us on Twitter at tutor2u.soc, and that will keep you up to date with anything that's happening on the website, and obviously share and spread the word on there. As well as that, if you have got any additional questions, log on to the A-Level Sociology student group, by which we are happy to provide you with any support or guidance that we can possibly give. That's the end of the video for Essential Sociology, getting ready for Paper 2, Beliefs in Society. Thanks very much for listening.